My name is Jacob Walker. I remember that Thanksgiving like a scar, sharp, vivid, and impossible to ignore. The kind of memory that doesn't fade with time, just deepens like a wrinkle on the soul. Outside, the world was alive. Homes on my street glowed with warmth. Laughter spilled out onto front lawns, and the comforting scent of roasted turkey drifted faintly through the cold November air. Someone was playing jazz across the block. Another house had a kid's cartoon blaring through an open window. But in my apartment, silence. Just me. A flimsy folding table. A microwave turkey dinner I picked up from the frozen aisle. And 2 plates. One for me. One I didn't need. I had set it out anyway. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of hope. Or maybe because some foolish, bruised part of me still believed they might call, but they didn't. It had been nearly 8 months since I last heard my parents' voices. My dad, Martin, hadn't so much as texted. My mum, Denise, always used to check in, even if it was just for show. But now, nothing. No, how are you? No, where are you spending the holidays? No inclusion. Just absence. It had started the day I said no. No to the family path. No to the internship at my father's firm. No to spending the rest of my life stuck in a corner office he'd picked out for me before I ever had a chance to decide who I was. That no didn't just upset him. It offended him, like I was throwing away a legacy I'd never asked for. After that, everything went quiet. At first I thought maybe it was just distance. Maybe they needed time to cool off. But time stretched. Weeks turned into months. My name disappeared from the family group chat. My sister Alina, the one I used to walk home from school every day, sent me one text on my birthday. "Hope you're well." I was lucky if I got a thumbs up in return when I reached out. On Thanksgiving Day, I sat there like a fool, refreshing my phone more times than I'd like to admit. Nothing. Then I made the mistake of checking Instagram. My cousin's stories were filled with golden laughter. A giant table, set for 20. Crystal glasses, candles glowing, plates piled high with sweet potatoes, stuffing, and perfectly carved turkey. Front and center sat my parents, Martin smiling like a politician, and Denise pouring wine like she didn't have a missing child. Alina sat beside Frank, her fiancé, both leaning into each other, grinning at some inside joke. They looked like a postcard. There was no empty chair, no sign that anyone was missing. I wasn't mentioned, not tagged, not even remembered. I could have been a stranger peeking through the window of someone else's life. I turned off my phone and stared at the untouched plate across from me, the one I'd set out for no one. I adjusted the napkin like it mattered, straightened the fork, tried to eat, and I couldn't. Not because of sadness, not even anger. It was something heavier, something colder, something final. That night, I sat by the window and watched the lights go out across the neighborhood, one by one, until only my reflection stared back at me. I didn't cry. I wrote. Not a letter. Not a message I'd never send. A list. Page 1 was titled, "What I Gave Up to Belong," and it was long. Every time I bit my tongue. Every time I said yes when I meant no. Every time I let someone else's version of me take the lead. Page 2 was shorter. It said build without them, and underneath I wrote one sentence: if they won't set a place for me at their table, I'll build my own, bigger, stronger, and mine. That was the night I stopped waiting. The night I crossed a line I never planned to return from. They didn't exile me. I let them go. Mornings in early December had a certain emptiness to them. Grey skies, breath fogging at the window, the radiator clicking like a clock without a rhythm. I woke up that week without an alarm, not because I had nowhere to be, but because my mind wouldn't let me rest. It had been exactly 9 days since Thanksgiving, and the sting hadn't dulled. It had settled deeper into my bones, like frost creeping under a doorframe. There was no plan yet, just resolve. I didn't know what I was building, only that I had to. The list I had made still hung beside my fridge, its paper curling at the corners. Every time I walked past it, I read the line again: build without them. At first it felt symbolic, something poetic to scribble when I was hurt. But now it felt like a contract, and I intended to honor it. I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor, the empty search bar daring me to figure out what I wanted from myself. I wasn't interested in revenge, not in the fire and ash kind anyway. I didn't want to show up at Christmas dinner with a new car just to prove I'd made it. That would have meant they still had the power to define success. No, I wanted something different. I wanted peace, but peace wasn't free. It had to be built. I started where I could: Craigslist, local job boards, a list of free workshops and community programs. I signed up for a course in basic carpentry, being held in an old warehouse near downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but something about building with my hands appealed to me. I had spent years behind screens and suits, following other people's instructions. Now I wanted to make something real, something that would stand on its own and didn't need their blessing. The first day of class, the room smelled of sawdust and sweat. The instructor, a broad-shouldered man named Cliff, introduced himself with a handshake firm enough to reset your wrist. He had kind eyes beneath a rough exterior, and when he spoke, there was a quiet steadiness in his tone, like someone who knew how to rebuild things, starting with people. "You're not here to impress anyone," he said, pacing in front of a row of battered workbenches. "You're here to learn how to make something strong. Start small, measure twice, cut once." I liked that. It was the first voice I'd heard in weeks that didn't carry judgment or pity, just direction. Over the next few weeks, I returned to that warehouse 3 nights a week. My hands blistered. My back ached. I ruined a dozen pieces of wood trying to make a straight cut. But for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I could shape. Cliff noticed my dedication. One night after class, he pulled me aside. "You got a quiet kind of focus," he said, "like you're working on more than wood." I nodded, not sure how much to say. "I guess I am." "Well, keep going," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Most people quit before it gets good." At night I'd walk home past rows of decorated houses, the windows glowing with trees and laughter I couldn't hear. I didn't feel envious anymore, just separate, like I was walking a different path. One without a map, but not without purpose. I didn't know it then, but that cold start, those nights in the warehouse, those early mornings spent Googling tools I couldn't pronounce, were the first bricks in something far bigger than I could imagine. They were the beginning of my frame, and soon I'd learn how to make it stand. It was the kind of morning that tried to convince you to go back to bed. Low clouds, a damp chill clinging to your clothes, and a sky the color of concrete. But I showed up at the warehouse anyway, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other. My palms were still raw from the last class, and I could feel a splinter under my thumb from a botched sanding job. But pain didn't bother me. Not anymore. Not when it came with progress. Cliff was already there, sweeping the sawdust into neat piles, his radio mumbling some old blues tune in the corner. He nodded when I walked in but didn't say anything. We had built a rhythm, he and I, quiet acknowledgement, no wasted words. About an hour in, while I was trying to level a crooked shelf, a voice called out behind me. "That's leaning harder than a drunk uncle on Christmas Eve." I turned. He was older, maybe late 50s, tall and lean with hands like tree bark and a face weathered enough to carry its own history. He wore a navy work jacket, sleeves rolled, a faded carpenter's pencil tucked behind one ear. "Name's Arthur," he said, offering a hand. "Cliff said you could use a partner today." I glanced at Cliff, who gave a subtle nod and went back to sorting nails. Arthur wasn't like the others in the class. He didn't fumble with the tools or hesitate when measuring. He moved with the confidence of someone who had once built real things, homes maybe, or lives. We worked side by side for most of the morning, barely speaking. Then, while fixing a step on a broken ladder, he looked up and asked, "You here for the skill or for the silence?" I didn't answer right away. He smiled. "It's usually one or the other." I exhaled slowly. "Bit of both." "Same here," he said, tightening a bolt. "Wife left 3 years ago. Kids don't talk to me much. Too proud to beg, too old to start over. So I build." There was no drama in his words, just fact. I respected that. By the end of the session, we had repaired the ladder, realigned the shelves, and sanded down a warped table that had been wobbly for months. Cliff walked by and gave a rare nod of approval. Arthur wiped his hands and reached into his coat. "Got something for you," he said, pulling out a folded flyer. "Old guy I used to work with runs a salvage yard on Ashland. Buys scrap, hires cheap labor. Not glamorous, but honest. Tell him Arthur sent you. He'll pay cash." I stared at the paper, then back at him. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I've seen that look in the mirror," he said. "Man trying to climb out of a hole no one saw him fall into." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. And that was enough. That night I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the flyer laid flat beside my half-eaten dinner. I read the address over and over, the ink smudged slightly where his thumb had pressed it. I didn't know what the salvage yard would bring. Maybe nothing. But it felt like the first door someone had held open for me in a long, long time, and I wasn't about to let it close. The sign was barely visible from the street. Ashland Salvage and Supply, hand-painted on a warped plank nailed above a chain-link fence. Rust crawled across the gate like ivy, and the whole place smelled of metal and wet soil. It wasn't beautiful, but it felt honest. I stepped inside, boots crunching over gravel and broken bolts. The lot was a patchwork of wrecked fences, stacked sheet metal, busted machinery, and bins filled with stripped wire and discarded screws. It looked like chaos at first glance, but underneath it, there was a strange order. Every piece had been touched by time, and someone who believed it might still be useful. Behind the office window sat a man hunched over a ledger, mid-60s, wiry, with wire-rimmed glasses and grease on his knuckles. He looked up when I knocked. "You Jacob?" he asked. I nodded. "Arthur sent me." He stared at me for a moment, then motioned toward the door. "All right, let's see what you can carry." The work was raw. We stripped copper from broken AC units, sorted nails by size, pressure-washed salvage that still had resale value. My hands bled more than once. My back ached like it hadn't since high school football. But I kept coming back. There was something oddly grounding about it, sifting through what others had thrown away and giving it a number, a purpose, a second chance. I related to the junk more than I wanted to admit. And the owner, folks called him Red, Wasn't the talkative type, but he noticed when you worked hard. By the end of the first week, he handed me an envelope with a few crumpled bills inside. Cash. No taxes. You hungry? We shared sandwiches on the tailgate of a rusted pickup. No small talk. Just the sound of birds and metal shifting under the wind. I hadn't realized how much I missed that. Someone simply sitting beside me without needing me to be anything. On the third week, Red walked up while I was organizing a pile of reclaimed wood. You said you do carpentry. A bit, I replied, learning. He pointed to the back of the lot. That old trailer back there belonged to my brother. It's gutted. I've been thinking about turning it into an office. Maybe a tiny home project if I can get a grant. He paused. You want to take a crack at the framing? My heart kicked up. This wasn't just cleanup. This was building. I'd like that, I said. He tossed me the keys. Then start with the bones. We'll worry about the skin later. I spent the next few nights sketching, Googling trailer conversions, and mapping out materials. I was still broke, still alone, and still carrying the bruise of being erased by my own family. But now, I had a task. A real one. Something mine. I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store and wrote Ashland Build on the cover. Inside, I began jotting measurements, drawings, notes, anything that made this feel like more than labor, like vision. And for the first time in months, I didn't fall asleep feeling empty. I felt useful. The trailer didn't look like much. Faded blue paint peeling at the seams, a cracked window covered with duct tape. The inside smelled of dust, old oil, and forgotten time. But when I stepped in with my tape measure and notebook, I saw more than damage. I saw outlines, not just on the walls, but in my mind. I imagined a clean workspace on one end, a fold-down desk by the window, shelving for tools, a little corner for coffee and peace, something simple, strong, something that didn't need to be grand to be meaningful. The first day, I pulled out the remaining nails, stripped the warped panels, and reinforced the floor joists with salvaged beams. It was tedious, slow work, but I loved it. Red didn't hover, but he passed by now and then, watching quietly. Once, he left a fresh set of drill bits on the trailer steps without saying a word. That meant more than if he'd said thank you. By the second week, word had spread. A man named Jonah stopped by, a contractor who sometimes picked through Ashland for reclaimed wood. He paused at the trailer, arms crossed, watching me install the new subfloor. "This yours?" he asked. I hesitated. "I guess it is now." He nodded slowly. "Clean lines, smart use of spacing. You working anywhere?" I shook my head. "Just here." He handed me a card. "If you ever want side gigs, call me." Not everyone knows how to work with their hands anymore. It was the first time in years someone had looked at my work like it was worth something. Later that night, I found myself sketching floor plans again. Not just for the trailer, but for other small builds. Garden sheds, home offices, even tiny houses. Ideas came faster than I could draw them, and I wasn't doing it for money. Not for revenge. Not even for recognition. I was doing it because something inside me had shifted. For so long, I'd tried to prove myself to people who didn't see me. Parents who wanted a version of me I never recognized. A sister who stopped calling when I stopped conforming. A family that only smiled when I stayed in my assigned lane. But this was mine. Every board, every bolt, every choice. It was like stitching myself back together with lumber and nails. One evening, Red walked over holding a thermos of coffee. "Looks good," he said simply, nodding toward the trailer. You got an eye for detail. Thanks, I replied. Feels good to make something that stays put. He leaned against a post. Funny, isn't it? What folks throw away, half this yard's junk to someone, gold to someone else. He looked at me for a long beat. You ever think maybe you're one of those things? It wasn't said with pity, just truth, and it landed like a hammer. That night, I stayed late after everyone had gone. The moon hung low over Ashland Salvage, painting everything in silver. I ran my hand along the new frame I'd installed, the wood smooth beneath my palm. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt found. The trailer was coming together. The walls were up, the windows reframed. A fresh coat of sealant gleamed faintly in the morning light. Each screw I turned, each hinge I aligned. It all felt like writing a sentence in a language only I could read. One built not from words, but from work. Real, tangible work. Red noticed, "You ever think about doing this full time?" he asked one day, watching me stain a set of reclaimed cabinet doors. I glanced at him, surprised. "You mean, like for a living?" "Yeah," he said. "I've seen plenty of people come through here swinging hammers. Not many do it with patience." He wasn't offering flattery. Red didn't speak unless he meant it. "There's an empty office back behind the shipping crates," he added. "Was gonna lease it out, but I'd rather see someone use it who gives a damn." I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or blink. "You want me to open a business?" I asked. "No," he replied, walking away. "I want you to build something that's yours. Call it whatever you want, long as you don't call it nothing." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning the idea over in my mind. The thought of starting something, my own shop, my own label, felt too big, too fragile. And yet, it was the first time I wasn't borrowing someone else's direction. Not my father's firm, not my mother's expectations, not even the blueprint I thought my life was supposed to follow. This would be mine, but if I did this, I needed a name. Not theirs, not Walker Carpentry or anything that would hint at family. I sat at the table, notebook open, pen tapping rhythmically as I stared at a blank page. And then, almost without thinking, I wrote, "Found Frame." Simple, true, a tribute to everything discarded that could be reclaimed, a name for people like me. The next day, I told Red. He didn't smile, he never did, but he nodded and handed me a key. "That door sticks a little," he said, "and the heater's moody. But it's yours now." The office was small, one window, a dusty fan in the ceiling, an old filing cabinet in the corner. But when I stepped inside, it felt bigger than anything I'd ever had, because no one gave it to me out of pity. I earned it. I spent the weekend cleaning, wiring a desk lamp, pinning up sketches and photos of builds I admired. I even printed a small paper sign, "Found Frame Wood Working Salvage Strength, New Shape." I taped it to the inside of the window. It was crooked, a little off-center, but it was real, mine. That night, as I locked up, I looked back at the glowing trailer and the sign in the window, and I smiled, not for show, not for approval, but because for once, I wasn't chasing anyone's shadow. I was finally standing in my own. It started with a voicemail. I hadn't heard my sister's voice in almost a year, so when her name flashed on my screen, Alina Walker, my breath caught mid-step. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, thumb hovering over the screen, unsure if I should answer. I didn't, but she left a message. "Hey Jacob, I heard from Aunt Valerie that you've been working on something. A business? That's great. Really. Listen, I'm not calling to stir things up. Just thought maybe we could talk. If you want. No pressure. There was a pause. Her breath hitched slightly. Anyway, happy you're doing well. Bye. It was short, cautious, as if she wasn't sure who she was calling anymore, or whether the door she was knocking on still existed. I didn't call back. Not right away. But I didn't delete the message either. The next morning, I was sanding down a set of window frames when Red tossed me an envelope. "Drop this off," he muttered, before walking away. Inside was a flyer, a local trade fair, Craft and Reclaim Expo, small booths, builders, salvage artisans, carpentry contests, networking. At the bottom corner, in scrawled handwriting, someone had written, "You should enter. Show them what forgotten looks like when it stands tall." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. Arthur had been gone for weeks. His health, Red said, had taken a turn. But this was his doing. I stared at the flyer for hours that night. A year ago, I couldn't even get invited to dinner. Now someone was inviting me to display my work next to professionals. I thought about my family, how they measured success in suits and square footage, how they laughed without looking back, how none of them ever asked what I'd wanted to build, only what I planned to earn. I thought about Alina's voice, the hesitation, the pause. Maybe she didn't know how to reach me. Maybe I didn't know how to let her. The expo was 3 weeks away. I circled the date on the wall calendar in my office, right above the sign that still read, "Found frame, salvaged strength, new shape." I wasn't doing this for recognition, not for them, not even for her. I was doing it because I'd spent too long waiting for someone to say I was enough. Now I could say it myself, without needing a single word. In the days leading up to the expo, the air around Ashland Salvage felt different, brisker, focused. I was in the zone, measuring, sanding, sealing, checking every angle of the trailer conversion like it was being judged by the gods of woodwork themselves. Red didn't say much, but his silence was supportive. He offered tools without being asked, hauled reclaimed trim pieces to my bench, left fresh coffee in a thermos by my door each morning. By the time Friday rolled around, I had repainted the trailer's trim, installed a custom fold-down desk, and hand-built a sliding barn door that Arthur would have been proud of. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A full transformation of something once left to rot. I packed up early, preparing the materials I'd take to the expo, photo boards, layout sketches, and a short write-up about the project. I even printed new business cards with the Found Frame logo. Then, just before closing, the bell above my office door chimed, and there she was, Alina, still wearing those pale beige coats she loved. Hair pulled back like always, but something in her eyes had changed, softer maybe, or tired. "Hey," she said, voice gentle. "I hope I'm not intruding." I stood frozen, unsure if I should offer her a seat or ask why she was here. She answered it for me. "I was at Mom and Dad's last week. They mentioned vaguely that you're doing your own thing now." She used air quotes, then sighed. I wanted to see it for myself. No expectations, no ambush. I leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, and her gaze drifted around the office. "It's more than I expected. A lot more." I didn't respond. She looked down, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "I guess I came because I miss you, and I think I owe you something I never said." Silence settled thickly between us. "I didn't stand up for you," she whispered. "Not when Dad called you a disappointment. Not when Mom erased your name from the Christmas list. I just kept my head down, like that would keep the peace." I swallowed hard. It's not about keeping peace, I said. It's about choosing comfort over truth. She winced but didn't deny it. I wanted to yell, or break something, or retreat, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to my desk, picked up one of the expo flyers, and handed it to her. This is where I'll be tomorrow. If you want to understand what I'm building, this is it. She took it, fingers brushing mine for just a second, and for the first time in a long time, we stood in the same space, without pretending. After she left, I sat for a while, staring at the dent in the metal trim where I dropped my hammer weeks ago. I could fix it, make it disappear, but I didn't. Some flaws deserved to stay visible. They reminded you how far you'd come. The trade fair was held in the old Civic Hall downtown. Concrete floors, high beams, and the smell of popcorn and varnish thick in the air. Booths lined both sides of the wide room, each one brimming with craftsmanship, hand-carved furniture, refurbished doors, antique tile mosaics, even a sculptor working with scrap metal live on site. Found Frame had booth #27. It wasn't flashy. I brought one banner, a photo board detailing the trailer's transformation, and the desk I'd built as its centerpiece. I placed a bowl of mints on the corner. Red insisted people always stopped longer when they had something to chew. He was right. By noon, I'd already talked to half a dozen people, small contractors, curious homeowners, a retired architect who nodded appreciatively and said, "Now this is intention." Still, my eyes kept drifting to the entrance. Part of me hoped she'd come. Part of me hoped she wouldn't. Midway through the afternoon, a woman approached my table, sharp eyes, clipboard in hand. "Are you the builder?" she asked. I straightened. Yes. She didn't smile, but her tone held interest. "I'm with Grantwood Design Collective. We're sourcing artisan partners for a small home prototype launch. Urban infill housing. Sustainable. Local." She tapped the desk surface with her pen. "This is good work. Clean, minimal, confident. You have a portfolio." I handed her a folder, fingers steady despite the sudden thunder in my chest. She flipped through it, then handed me a card. "Let's talk next week. I think you've got something." She walked away. I exhaled, only then realizing how tightly I'd been holding my breath. This was more than encouragement. This was opportunity. A crack in the ceiling I'd thought would never open. And I wasn't done absorbing that moment when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jacob." I turned. My parents stood 5 feet away. Martin, arms folded across a cashmere coat. Denise, expression unreadable, eyes scanning the booth like it was a courtroom exhibit. "Your sister told us," she began, but I didn't hear the rest. I saw the flicker of surprise in my father's eyes, the hesitation, the recalibration. He hadn't expected this. Not the crowd, not the praise, not the space I had created. Without him. I didn't invite them in, didn't offer chairs, didn't ask them what they thought. I simply nodded once, then turned to speak to the next visitor who had paused to admire the desk. And just like that, I returned to my work, because their approval no longer shaped my worth. The day after the expo, I returned to Ashland early. The sky was still silver with dawn, and the yard was quiet. No clatter of forklifts, no metal being sorted, just the hum of wind moving through wire. I unlocked the trailer and stepped inside, the smell of fresh wood still clinging to the space. The little fold-down desk, the reclaimed shelving, the lamp I'd wired by hand, it all stood still, like a monument no one else needed to recognize for it to matter. My phone buzzed. A message from Grantwood Design. "Let's move forward. We're excited." No exclamation points. No fluff. but it meant everything. I'd gone from abandoned dinner tables to project proposals, from silence to substance. Later that morning, Red dropped by. He didn't ask about the expo. Didn't need to. He glanced at the trailer, then at me, and simply said, "Did you leave anything on the table?" I thought for a second. "No," I replied. "I brought all of it." "Good," he grunted, nodding. "That's how you know it was real." In the afternoon, I took down the flyer Arthur had once given me, the one that had led me here. The corners were curling, the ink faded, but I kept it. Not as a crutch, as a compass, a reminder of the turn I took when no one else thought I'd find my way. I pinned it to the back wall of my office, next to the sketch that started it all. Found frame, salvage strength, new shape, my shape. That weekend, I got a letter, not an email, not a voicemail, a handwritten envelope from Alina. Inside, a simple note. "You were right. You didn't need to come back. We should have come to you. I see you now. I'm proud of what you've built." No apologies, no excuses, just words. And for once, that was enough. On Monday morning, I walked into my office, turned on the coffee maker, and flipped the sign in the window to open. Then I opened the blinds. Sunlight filled the room, and I stood still, letting it warm the space I had once believed would never exist for someone like me. Because I had built more than a business. I had built a life, not to prove them wrong, but to finally be right with myself.